trying to promote accessible and participatory inclusion and promoting leadership amongst women and strengthening resilience and capabilities, which implies the focus on gender in our strategies, our plans, in our development, and the increase of decision making opportunities, as well as access to statistics and information, being sensitive to gender. A good example is the foundation in Guatemala and the different organizations that are trying to develop resilient women. I also want to point out the different efforts geared with the Central American Tourist Office. We are trying to provide the necessary tools to prevent all kinds of risks and threats of a climatological nature, to strengthen the local economy and the development of coherent policies and the preservation of the environment. So we have contributed to this coherence in a highly vulnerable territory to develop agencies um, that try to reduce risks and to develop resources, hotels to add to this value chain due to the uh, climatological changes, and also trying to come up with risk reduction criteria and to provide uh, tourism quality seal to all of these endeavors, as well as working along with micro and small businesses. We are promoting measures to strengthen those alliances focused on risk and creating risk assessment in the textile and the manufacturing sector and the company commercial sector to come up with resilient companies. We are coming up with creative, concrete actions such as training to strengthen our capabilities and our education capabilities to uh, promote prevention of these vulnerabilities, along with some financial incentives to promote quality and um, consistency. So we have a plan of regional contingencies defined by our presidents in March of 2020, where the regional contingency plan was created that prioritized the contention and the management of the pandemic. We also created a regional platform initially with the pandemic, and then we have extended that to other areas such as real-time monitoring, and we are prioritizing all of these resources to be accessible so that efficiencies and effectiveness can be achieved, trying to cater to this regional public, availing themselves of educational tools, technological tools, and also real time threat and hazard monitoring, uh, because this reduces vulnerability. And all of these capacities enable us to have better um, tools to make informed decisions when assessing the damage in a disaster. So, for example, Atlas, the Central American Atlas, is an organization that identifies information from Mexico all the way down from Colombia, with different layers and different mechanisms uh, that have been strengthened. Our local, regional organization has been um, improved, improving geospatial observation, and we have obtained a number of good new tools alongside with organizations such as NASA, and taking all of these efforts together so that we become functional, so that we can make informed decisions, and so that we can have knowledge management through virtual education and other tools that are being developed for geological um, risk management, for volcanic activity. I also would like to highlight this initiative with respect to the recovery observatory so that we can observe geo movements via satellite uh, so as to be able to recover sooner from a disaster of this kind, so that we can follow it up, so that we can have the appropriate planning. We are hoping that this can be incorporated at the national level through existing damages in those areas that were also impacted by hurricanes, and identifying new risk scenarios that were impacted by this phenomena alongside our capabilities. All of these tools, all this methodology has enabled us to come up with projects, and I think that exchanging information with those who make decisions is important. By sharing data and enabling real-time information, enable us to come up with resilient and safe planning that will make our investments sustainable. One of our main goals is to incorporate all of these things to the different agendas of the Central American countries, and we have been promoting our policy at the strategic level, at the regional level, such as monitoring and follow up instruments that help us come up with strategic guidelines uh, within the Sendai framework. This evidence says this strengthening that has uh, come up, such as the way to focus on it in a holistic way, in an inclusive way. And so, within the framework of recovery, we are focusing all our efforts on this, uh, adding a multi threat dimension to our preparedness so that our countries can cooperate with each other so that we can create better development conditions, to have a transformative vision, and to gear our public and private organizations toward that transformation and a better articulation between the different sectors so that our disasters can be managed as real management, risk assessment and management programs with participation of all of our companies that are more vulnerable and
Right.
ever more exposed to this phenomena. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Ms. Javera. That was
Dios mío,
very
muchas gracias.
that was very, very informative
Esto
and very
fue
insightful
sumamente
in
informativo,
understanding what the
una
value of that
visión,
is.
una perspectiva sumamente importante, el valor que esto supone. Una de las cosas que me impactó, de las que ha dicho, es no solamente que están considerando a los individuos indígenas que representan un segmento grande de la población, sino también cómo la tecnología del alto nivel, como de NASA, les da un panorama muy comprensivo. Me llena de entusiasmo, tenemos muchas preguntas, espero que nuestro auditorio pueda hacer preguntas también. Yo pienso
Policy that you're putting in place that I think we're definitely reflecting some of the same key goals that our Sandai framework is looking to achieve. Thank you so much for that healthy presentation. For our next speaker, who's really just really doesn't need any introduction, but he represents the Caribbean Development Bank, and he has been one of the pioneers representing in the Caribbean, specifically Barbados and Jamaica. He has worked for Mr. Lewis has worked as a civil engineer with over 25 years of technical and managerial experience in infrastructure development in the Caribbean. He has led identified design, appraisal, and delivery of infrastructure projects in several sectors, including water supply, solid waste management, road transport, and flood mitigation. One of the things about Mr. Lewis is that as the Caribbean Development Bank since 2004, where he currently serves as the head of Economic Infrastructure Division. At CDB, he leads a team of engineers and financial analysts in preparation, appraisal, and supervision of all CDB finance infrastructure projects in 19 borrowing member countries, stretching from Guyana to the Belize. Very well versed in understanding the deep information what's happening in the Caribbean. And I'm just really delighted to have him here on stage to kind of share with all the information that we learned in the implementation of the Sendai network across the Caribbean. Without further ado, Mr. Lewis, you have the floor.
So thank you. Good day. Thank you, Chair. Good day to all participating in this forum. I bring greetings on behalf of the Vice President of Operations, Mr. Isaac Solomon, who was not able to attend today's meeting. Before I start, I'd like to thank the organizers for coordinating these important discussions and for giving CDB the opportunity to participate. As we are all aware, Caribbean countries are exposed to both geophysical and climate-related hazards such as earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and drought. Over the last 5 years, we have experienced significant negative environmental, economic, and social consequences from the impact of major hurricanes, including Hurricane Matthew in 2016, Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, and Dorian in 2019. The total cost of destruction wreaked by Hurricanes Irma and Maria in the British Virgin Islands and in St. Martin exceeded 100% of the gross domestic product of those countries. In 2021, the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines resulted in excess of $400 million US dollars in losses, not only in St. Vincent, but also in neighboring Barbados, where the airport had to be closed for an extended period. On August 14th, 2021, an earthquake in Haiti killed more than 2,000 people and caused damage and loss estimated at over $1.6 billion US dollars. Within the context of climate change, Caribbean countries continue to face challenges adapting to increasing intensity of extreme weather events, declining freshwater availability, including extended periods of drought, and rising sea levels associated with increases in coastal erosion, flooding, and saltwater intrusion of freshwater aquifers. Given this context, it is of paramount importance that we address climate and disaster risks and continuously build the region's resilience to disasters. Resilient public infrastructure that primarily transport, water supply, energy, tourism, and education is critical to a country's ability to reduce economic losses caused by disasters. Through CDB's investment programs in major infrastructure with governments and with the private sector in the region, CDB has some influence on how this infrastructure is developed. We are of the view that any new investment in public infrastructure must contribute to climate and disaster risk resilience of that infrastructure and hence of the country as a whole. This principle also applies to infrastructure reconstruction and rehabilitation. The reconstruction process must take into account not only the hazard that triggered the disaster, but also any other hazards that the country or community may be exposed to in the future. It is critical that we build back better, and this is necessary in order to avoid reproducing risk conditions. At the Caribbean Development Bank, we have developed and implemented an explicit disaster management policy and strategy, which articulates how we integrate climate change considerations into all of our internal and external operations. All CDB finance infrastructure projects are now not only subject to environmental impact assessments, but also to disaster risk assessments and to climate vulnerability assessments, which assess the level of climate risk on the project and recommend specific adaptation measures to those risks. These assessments are undertaken by qualified consultants engaged by the client and reviewed by CDB staff. We also assist our borrowing member countries with integrating climate change consideration into their policies and operations. These activities include initiatives to generate relevant and reliable climate data and information in partnership with our institutional stakeholders and development agencies. Notably, we have collaborated with the Climate Studies Group in Mona UE to prepare and publish of the Caribbean Climate Report 2021. This is a reference document that provides reliable and updated climate data and information, and information that can be used to develop more robust regional and national early warning systems and support impact-based forecasting in the region. We have also collaborated with the water and transport sector professionals to develop tools and manuals for integrated climate adaptation into infrastructure planning. For the tourism sector, the bank assisted the Caribbean Tourism Organization in the development of a multi-hazard risk assessment management guide and a sustainable tourism policy and development framework to facilitate tourism stakeholders to incorporate disaster risk management, climate resilience, and gender-sensitive approaches to sector planning and operations. In the education sector, CDB supported CDIMA in their Safe Schools program, which looked at development of safe school policies for Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia. It is intended that these policies will be used by the ministries of education in the respective countries to inform disaster risk reduction and environmental protection measures in their schools. To summarize, CDB has integrated disaster risk and climate vulnerability assessments in all of its internal and external operations. All of our major investment in regional infrastructure now require climate impacts to be factored in the project design. We have worked with regional stakeholders to improve climate science data and the development of tools to inform evidence-based planning and effective measures to enhance disaster reduction and resilience building in several key sectors, including water supply, transportation services, tourism, and education. We are aware that many gaps still remain, and the bank is committed to continuing to work with both public and private sector partners to overcome these challenges and to build a resilient and sustainable Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lewis, for that. With your background, having so much experience with water supply and the rising of sea levels, I'm really interested to kind of understand more about your understanding of climate vulnerability assessment and risk when we do our Q&A. Very, very insightful information, and the data really speaks for itself of the impact. Thank you so much for that introduction, that breadth of information that we really need to adhere to. So moving to our next panelist, we have Dante Arenas from ECLAC. Dante is an agronomist, an agrarian economist from the Pontificia Universidad of Chile. Representative of ECLAC is in the technical secretariat and the steering committee of the New York of National Public Investment System of Latin America and the Caribbean, Red SNP. As an ILPES official, he conducts research, technical assistance, and training for government and public officials of various countries in the region in the areas of planning, budgeting, result-based management, public investment, and evaluating of public policies. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm really excited to hear about our next speaker, Mr. Dante Kurutu. Dante?
Muchas gracias, mucho gusto, un saludo desde Santiago de
Very
Chile.
much. Nice to meet you. Nice to see everyone. Greetings from Santiago, Chile, Aporte. I'm here to talk to you basically about public investment and the role it plays in reactivating our economies. Reactivation of the economies that has to be different from what we're used to, from what we've gone through, not only because of the pandemic, but the social crisis that we're in. And I believe I will be able to control my presentation slides on my own. So let's begin. I would like to tell you about the role that investment plays in growth, meaning increasing human capital and monetary or financial capital by investing in education, for instance, for human capital, a very important element to increase productivity, revenue, and the population well-being. Now, this would be the typical structure that allows us to understand economic growth. We have labor or work, investment, and growth. This investment has to be the appropriate one in terms of its quantity, its amount to be invested, but also in quality. That's extremely important according to our network and our national investment system from CEPAL and from HEISETA. We provide assistance to that network, and we have focused not only in the quantity or amount of investment, but also the quality. It has to be a profitable project for that type of social investment that we're trying to allocate. Now, in terms of public investment, that goes beyond economic and public growth because we're talking about public investment that is a key factor for sustainable growth, resilient, and inclusive for that country. Not only economic growth I'm talking about, but it also has to allow us for equality among regional areas, the achieving of its goal or its purpose, and what's in the agenda 2030, and also to improve the quality of life for those most vulnerable in the population, because economic growth not always achieves that, an improvement in the quality of life based on all the indexes. And turns out that sometimes people do not end up living a better life. So employment has to go up, but the quality of life, because the structural crisis that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean, on top of the climate change and the climate challenges, has to be fought by public and private investment. But in this new frame or this new type of investment that is centered around its citizenry and increasing capital, human capital, and financial capital to achieve that sustainable development, sustainable growth, decreasing inequality, adding to those sectors that not only can increase people's incomes, but also their quality to sustain that growth. And also, it has to be centered around those sectors that can promote technological change or technological improvements. Those would be 7 sectors to allocate those investments. You can see them on the screen. So it would have to be renewable energy, electric transportation, digital development, healthcare, manufacturing, agricultural, and hydrotechnologies, and also sustainable tourism. Those are the sectors that we believe in CEPAL that the investment has to be allocated to in order to generate sustainable development, sustainable growth, taking into account all these environmental and social factors. Now, taking into account the role that we play in the public network, we are working on training, the development of methodology, sharing insights so that all of us countries that are members can generate a common knowledge to share best practices, cooperate and talk, and improve all these sectors. I can show you those 16 countries that are part of our network. We also have Jamaica, who has not participated as actively, but it has participated. And then you can go to our webpage shown right here to go over that methodology, all those aspects related to our network, and the observatory and lab that I worked at. It's also listed there. And I can tell you also some of the details that I have been working on in these countries to economies. First of all, and let's pay attention to this, we're still in the middle of the pandemic. This is not over yet. And some of the countries are thinking of activating that. Was their action going to be or reactivating themselves? For instance, Uruguay is focusing on supporting its transportation network, electricity network. Paraguay the same. Chile has no plans, but it has already predefined that it needs to work on those networks. Mexico has the Mayan train, an oil refinery, and then the new airport in Mexico City. So they're all focusing on reactivating their economies. Honduras also has a reactivating economy program. Panama has another one for 2021. So all of these are examples of these new reactivating projects. And the most important thing is that we are developing green investments, sustainable investments. So that's a change to that old investing paradigm. And I can share an experience with you from Chile and Peru, and also Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua are just about to, which is to do an identification of the social cost of carbon and fuels and assess that so that more profitable projects, the ones that have a better understanding, are those that have less carbon byproducts. We're also working with ELICAP in Costa Rica to develop some methodology and to be able to incorporate that in our countries. And these are just ideas.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Karutu. There are two things that I like about
Muchas,
what you said was
muchas
quantity versus
gracias.
quality. That is
Una
very,
cosa
very
que me
important,
gustó.
especially when we're thinking about a new age and a new approach to be more resilient in our recovery. Moving on for the sake of time to our next speaker. Now, we say the best for last, right? Because our next speaker, we will be able to kind of really take it home in providing some of the insights of who we are. I won't give her a long introduction. One of the things that I will say about her that's very brief is that she gave a proposal for poverty reduction and fiscal decentralization issues. And I think that's really represents of who she is as a representative for the multi-sector, no other than Zoila Porto Carrero. Ms. Carrero?
Thanks a lot, Sergio. Actually, I will present in Spanish, but I can my presentation. Let me know if you can show it. Thanks. Perfect. So, ¿por qué hablar o vincular la información sobre
Okay, so why should we connect the information that we have about disaster risk with activating our economies? Just as some of my colleagues have mentioned that we are still in an emergency situation. We have not leave it behind us. We are still in recovery mode. And in order to reactivate the economies, we cannot forget about the opportunity to rebuild in a better way, to make better use or more efficient use of our resources. That's the reason why I want to share with you this example that in our countries in Central America and the Caribbean, for instance, El Salvador, we are countries that we could reach up to 95% or perhaps more of our population exposed to that disaster risk. Different parts of our territory, more than 95% of it is prone to those risks, to those threats. Hence, any type of investment, whether public or private, has to consider those risks. That is, if we want to really take into account that investment against those risks, because whenever we have a flood or an earthquake, we would have losses against that capital infrastructure investment. So that's what I want to share with you, that we have to involve the participation of all different departments, whether fiscal or development departments, that we are all going to suffer and face the losses from that disaster, not only the human element, but also in our own pockets. And when our infrastructure gets damaged, we have a decrease in all of those aspects, and the investment goes up through the roof, and then the government has to generate more capital in order to rebuild that infrastructure, and that's the type of status in which our economies find themselves at. Most of our countries are trying to spend more and more to reactivate those economies. So how can we do away with all of that? That is to invest and to spend so that we have everything focused in reducing the poverty and improving social equality. How can we work towards that? All new investments, first of all, would have to try to reduce those risks that already exist and do not add on to those with new risks. I'm sorry, but I was not able to move on to my next slide. There we go. Thank you. Now, how can we focus on that? So we can start with strategic paths to recognize those risks of disasters. What we've been facing in all of our departments and entities is the need to articulate all that information, all those details, not after the impact or the disaster once it took place, but before, so that we're better prepared and we can also generate resilient investments. So first, we have to generate more better information. We would also need tools, financial instruments that would allow us to mobilize those resources quickly. We have all those tools, but in reality, they should not be competing against each other, but complementing each other. And that's where I want to center on, to incorporate those risks and those elements in the disasters in the cycle of public investment, monitoring, supervision, and incorporate it as an added value to make that public expense make better sense of it. Where are we spending so that we can have an appropriate path for that? This is what we've been working on at the World Bank in Central America and the Caribbean to support their respective treasury departments so that they can work jointly, holistically, as a general organism, and always with that added value, the mitigation of risk, and the Treasury Department can not only help in promoting a more agile or fast resource operation. If we're always facing tropical storms, disaster risk, as ETA and IOTA, I mean, just as it happened in Central America and Honduras, this reactivating plan has to be resilient. So we have to facilitate the information regarding any threat, any risk within a map so that we can identify how to invest by sectors and in a resilient way. Identifying all the risks within the territory and what are my abilities or my capabilities to prevent and to respond to that risk, and also the competitive advantages and disadvantages based on the type of investments that would allow us to reactivate the economy. And for example, where we should work on within our regions, tourism is a potential sector. Industry is another potential sector, but we also lack water services, emergency services, telecommunication, transportation, logistics in our countries, which are indispensable for a more quick and proper response. So we should focus on investing in these different sectors that they would vary according to country. But let's do a crossing over of information, of details, so that we can strengthen those national systems for public investment, identifying the different threats and risks. Again, cross-referencing all that information for resilient investment. And I'm going to give you an example for that. We're going to have scarce resources. They're still in that status because of COVID. So we have a national tool, or we could have one that would allow us to identify those different risks, the poverty levels, where are the needs, and to cross-reference all that information with the risk for disasters, knowing where do we have gaps, where do we have paths, how then can we prioritize those resources in that public investment with also private investment, relying on all that information and even the science, the observatories, meteorological observatories. Claudia was referring to the use of different technologies. If we could really use all of those new technologies, and I want to wrap up with this example because I know that I only had about 10 minutes. So let's move on to the next slide with that example, which allowed us to identify the different levels of poverty within our territories where there were unsatisfied needs And we did a cross-referencing of all that information against the competitive advantages for each area and their own resources to be invested on. And that's how we were able to determine the different investment according to each sector that can have a good impact on social development. All of this was joined by criteria, of course, incorporating public investment and also reactivation economy criteria. And just to conclude, we should really rely on new technological tools, the development of those new technological tools, such as, for instance, our mobile phones or cell phones, that we could monitor the investment, how it's going through the territory, the area, and how the risks are being mitigated by that. That is the type of work we have been doing, trying to incorporate the different roles from the Treasury departments, the national system, the different bodies that handle disasters, and how those investments from public sector, private sector, or associations can come out of. Thank you.
That was very, very insightful as well. And the thing that the three things that I can't agree with you more on, just understanding how hard it is for that collaboration to have, how important it is for that collaboration to happen, right? How important for us to be able to work together, and secondly, how to be proactive instead of reactive in some of the approaches, right? Because we know it's going to happen. Disaster is going to happen at some point. What are we going to be able to do to make that happen? So, I want to transition into our Q&A sessions. And if you're listening to us live in our audience, and I see a few questions coming in, feel free to pop in your questions for our panelists so that we may be able to ask them directly, what are some of the things that you may want to have get clarification on in order to get a better preparedness, a better resilient plan for your organization or country. But one of the things that I wanted to ask, and I would open to any panelists who want to kind of answer this. Dante, you mentioned a lot of very interesting things around being renewable energy and quality versus quantity of the investment. A lot of inclination of the assessment of how important it is to have climate vulnerability assessment and risk assessment, right? These things are very important. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask, just, how, from a both perspective, what does a preparedness look like, right? What does a good resilient recovery plan look like for both businesses and government? I would love to kind of get any of our panelists to kind of answer that just briefly and directly. I have two more questions if we don't have it. Anyone? Well, I'm gonna point them out.
So let me take a stab at this. The question was that what does a disaster plan look like? And I would say it depends. It would not be the same for every single business or every single sector. The thing is to know where your vulnerabilities are, I think. For a private sector, business continuity planning and so on is absolutely essential that you could that you could understand how you can continue your services to your clients in the event of an extreme disaster. In the event of a water utility, in the case of a water utility, for example, where your vulnerabilities are, where which systems are vulnerable to flooding, to damage from landslides and so on. So the issue is to be fully understand where your vulnerabilities are and have contingencies in place where you can respond in a timely manner. Or if the damage is even more severe than was planned for, have a plan B, right? So there's no template that you can fit. It is really for you to have an understanding of where the vulnerabilities are in your system and plan for those. So it has to be evidence-based. The other thing I wanted to throw out is something I witnessed in 2017, I think it was, where a storm of such intensity hit the BVI, or two storms hit the BVI, where the planning didn't matter, where not only was the infrastructure, the water and road and so on, severely damaged, but the government buildings were all decimated. And the homes of the people who ran the government were also decimated. So you had a scenario there, which I think where the entire system is dysfunctional for a period of time. And I think that's something that nobody in the past has actually planned for, and something we need to be taken into account moving forward, because those storms started off as category 1 and increased so rapidly to category 5 that it took many of those countries off guard when it hit them, Dominica, and so on. So those are the kind of things. So it really has to be tailor-made for your system based on your vulnerabilities and the context in which you work. That would be my attempt at that answer, Sergio.
No, I really appreciate that answer, because you can plan for the worst, but Murphy's always there, or something always going to go worse what you haven't prepared for. And I think that's what really speaks to my next question, is how important the collaboration is needed, right? And so, Willa, I wanted to kind of ask you just to give me some insight of that collaboration, because in the event that the BVI is down and the entire island is decimated, we need to rely on our sister islands or our friends to be able to be responsive. And that the collaboration is so important, but not easily as implemented due to regulations and policy and jurisdictions, right? How do you think we can have a better approach in that? Zuila?
Gracias, Sergio. Definitivamente quería comentar sobre este punto porque todos los países.
Thank you, Sergio. I really wanted to comment on that because all of us countries can have different plans for risk management, but then also different impact from the event or the disaster. But if I had to summarize it in four bullets, I would have to start with information, recollecting information, all those details about our current status, and the coordination of the different sectors, that we have to have a leader or be empowered, politically empowered, so that we can coordinate technically all those sectors and mobilize all the resources quickly, fast. And the fourth bullet would be a procurement, a purchase and acquisition process for everything that's necessary. So coordinating, sharing information, joining efforts, and having all those processes to acquire and produce efficiently, respond efficiently. And in terms of answering your question about leadership and empowerment to cooperate, that is critical, especially when you find yourself in an emergency situation and in that emergency. But I would not want us to get lost in that emergency itself, but prior to it, by identifying those mitigating projects, generating all that information that can serve us as a region so that we could all be better informed and make better and critical decisions. And as an example, I can tell you, for instance, we join forces, six different sectors, organisms, when we have dry runs, and it starts with the potential event to the execution. When the alert is sent out, then it becomes a state of emergency. It activates all these financial tools and donations that articulate the different sectors, that response is generated, and then all the funding comes out, direct participation, and then we can identify after that some territories spend more than a year to implement all that. So how can we be expecting a quick response when all these processes for public or private investment can take us so long. So coordination and cooperation to make those processes quickly, efficiently is crucial
Thank
to
you so
me.
much for that, Zorila. I really appreciate that. And yes, information is key. As we wrap up this session, I really want to thank our panelists all for really being here and sharing that breadth of information. I've taken a bunch of notes, and a summary will be available for our audience to be able to have some more of a summarized and access to those slides as well. As we close out, I also want to like to thank the UNDRR for organizing this event, Jamaica, and the SEDIMA for really being taking action, right? Taking the right actions, the steps to form a collaborative environment. The one thing I want to leave us with is, let us never forget that success is when preparation meets opportunity. But in our case, it could save a life. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And I really appreciate you allowing us to share this information under this umbrella. You have a wonderful day and God bless. Thank you.
Thanking Sergio Bengel, founder of Pi Data, quite charismatic, very spirited conversation a while ago in his session. And I'd also like to thank the other moderators in the other parallel session, session 4, Juan Mendez and Pablo Escribano, for taking the panelists as well as the participants through that particular session. It is about a few minutes after 12 o'clock, so I'm just reminding all the members of the media fraternity that there is a special media training taking place just for you, the fraternity, until tomorrow between 12 o'clock and 12:30. Just 30 minutes, and all you have to do is register for that event. So we're going to take a break. We'll be back at 2 o'clock where we have our special session 2 coming up, as well as Learning Lab. Now, we just want to remind you, you will no longer be able to register for Learning Lab 2 because that was already closed. Registration has already been closed, and therefore, those participants should receive a link in their email or in their inbox. So ensure that you're using the hashtag RP21, and I will see you back in 2 hours.